on.
The most historic transformation is going to be when the Conservatives replace this incompetent government. And my question is for the Finance Minister, who refuses to show up to the Finance Committee for 2 hours to answer basic questions about her failed budget. She misled Canadians, blowing through all fiscal restraint that she promised by driving struggling households $4,200 further into debt because she threw $60 billion of inflationary fuel on the fire that she started. She spent more airtime bragging about her budget at Fenway Park than she has at the Finance Committee. Will she end her inflationary spending, show up to work, or does she think that budgets balance themselves?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I am really looking forward to appearing before the Finance Committee as scheduled tomorrow. Of course, it will require the Conservatives to end their, frankly, childish temper tantrum to give me the chance to appear. But I do really look forward to it, Mr. Speaker. And the reason I look...
Going to wait for silence on all sides. And while someone's answering, I would ask everyone not to shout them down. That's almost like bullying in a schoolyard. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister has 10 seconds left.
You might say, Mr. Speaker, you might even say that shouting down a woman speaking in the House is a childish temper tantrum. You might say that, but I do look forward to appearing before the committee tomorrow, as I've always been scheduled to do.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Canadians are grateful that the Finance Minister has finally returned to Canada. Inflation and higher interest rates are really challenging for a lot of people. That means one of my principal responsibility is not to pour fuel on the flames of inflation, so fiscal responsibility is really important. Mr. Speaker, those are the words of the Finance Minister just 9 weeks ago, who can't bring herself to answer basic questions about why her budget is the exact opposite. She's gone into hiding, trying to distance herself from her own government. Canadians want to know if she's going to answer the question, and if not, will she get out of the way so Conservatives can just take over?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I am not, our government is not going to let Conservatives get away with ridiculous and transparent efforts to mislead Canadians.
She's right here.
The fact is that the presence of Canadian ministers, and this week the presence of our Prime Minister at a G7 meeting, is doing our job for Canadians, and Canadians know it. Now, when it comes to our budget, Mr. Speaker, you know who I trust to rate our fiscal responsibility? The ratings agencies. And S&P reaffirmed our AAA rating.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
I'll welcome her back to Canada again. But here are the actual facts. Every Canadian family will now pay $4,200 more per household for her spending spree. Housing prices have doubled. Food bank use is at record highs. Canada accumulated debt faster than almost every other advanced country, but our economy underperformed nearly all of its counterparts, and we have the lowest projected GDP growth of any, GDP per capita growth of any advanced economy for the next 30 years. Why does she continue to spread this falsehood? We can't spend our way to prosperity, so will she keep running away from questions, or will she just get up?
The Honourable Minister for Housing.
You can tell when the personal attacks are increasing that it's proportional to the lack of ideas that actually help Canadians. When you look at housing supply, we're the party that has enabled more Canadians to access affordable housing, as well as more access to the dream of Canadian home ownership through the first-time home buyer tax-free savings account, a 1% tax on vacant, non-Canadian, non-residential real estate, as well as building more housing supply through the Housing Accelerator Fund. Throughout all, then come here and pretend that they care.
L'honorable député de Louis Saint-Laurent.
Monsieur le Président, les Canadiens...
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are wondering one thing. When will the government really connect with the problems that affect them directly every day? When they were in Japan or Washington or globetrotting elsewhere, the Minister of Finance has spent over Does the finance minister know that 1.5 million Canadians are going to food banks? We're talking about essentials. Did she think of citizens that for 8 years now have had to pay twice as much for rents and mortgages? That's the daily reality of Canadians. When are they going to connect with that? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Encore une fois, Monsieur le Président,
Once again, Mr. Speaker, I have a question for the Conservatives. Do they think? Are they proposing an isolationist policy for Canada? Are they proposing that Canada shouldn't go to G7 meetings like the one in Washington? Are the Conservatives proposing that we don't go to meetings at the White House? Is that the Conservatives' policy? On this side of the House, we understand that Canada exists in an interconnected worldwide economy. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, maybe the Finance Minister has a short memory because in November, she was proud of tabling the fall economic update and saying, that's it, we see the light at the end of the tunnel. We have a target for returning to balanced budgets. That was in November. Because a month ago, when the budget was tabled, it was zero. No return to balanced books. And worse than that, 2 weeks ago, bang, her party slapped us all in the face. Her party wants nothing to do with balanced books. The Minister of Finance, who was so proud in November to say that we're going to come back to balance, inaudible. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
il y a une grande différence.
Mr. Speaker, there's a big difference between our government and the Conservatives. The difference is that we are proud of Canada. We're proud of the Canadian economy. When it comes to budgetary policy, the S&P agency has supported our AAA credit rating after our budget was tabled. And I think that Canadians are smart enough to believe S&P and not anti-Canadian rhetoric coming from the Conservatives.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Finance Minister is not answering questions, and it is on her watch that the OECD calculates Canada will be the worst performing advanced economy over 2020 to 2030 and is on this path until 2060. This means Canadian living standards and our quality of life relative to other countries have declined and will continue to. This is due to the Finance Minister's high tax, high debt, high spend budgets, and this Liberal budget right now will add $4,200 to every Canadian family. So when will the Finance Minister reverse course on her Made in Canada path to decline for Canadian families?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I am not a virtual reality creation here. I am standing up in this House and very glad to answer questions about the economic policy which is delivering results for Canadians and which has Canada as the strongest economy in the G7. So let me share some facts rather than overheated, torqued Conservative rhetoric. Canada has a AAA credit rating reaffirmed by S&P after we tabled our budget. Canada has the strongest economic growth and the lowest debt to GDP.
For Charleswood St. James, Assiniboia Headingley.
The Finance Minister plans to spend $490 billion in this budget, but is refusing to show up at the Finance Committee for just 2 hours to answer questions. It's a budget that will drive every Canadian family another $4,200 into debt. Canada has the 5th highest increase in government spending, the 3rd largest increase in our debt to GDP. Our debt has increased faster than almost every other advanced country. Just last November, she promised to balance the budget by 2028. This budget, her deficits go on forever and ever. Why is she breaking that promise?
Yeah. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Get up and say it because it makes no sense. The Finance Minister has said she's there tomorrow. So I don't know why they haven't revised their questions, but I will ask Mr. Speaker, if they give me the chance.
I'm going to ask the Honourable Government House Leader to wait a second until everything calms down so that we can hear his answer. The honourable member for Charleswood St. James, Assiniboia Headingley wants to hear the answer. Please start from the top, please.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said, the finance minister is appearing tomorrow. So it does seem ridiculous for the finance minister to keep standing and saying she's going to be there tomorrow. But I do want to come back to them questioning why the finance minister of a G7 country would participate in G7 meetings. Well, Mr. Speaker, it may be because we live in an interconnected economy. You know, when the Conservatives were dealing with issues like climate change, they went to world forums to attack action on climate change and to drag other countries out of doing the essential work of protecting our planet. We talk to other countries because we understand we live in an interconnected world, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Thank you. We do welcome the finance minister back to the House here. But what we're asking for, let's be clear, is for 2 hours of her time. That's $1 billion a minute. You know what? We have real problems. According to a university report, we have the third largest increase in its total debt to GDP ratio, which has resulted in one of the lowest GDP growth ratios. In fact, we're to be at the bottom of the OECD going forward. Will the minister finally come to Finance Committee for 2 hours to explain why she's broken all of her promises?
The Honourable Minister for Families.
It's typical of the Conservatives that they won't take yes for an answer. The finance minister is going to committee tomorrow, so long as they don't filibuster it. But let's talk about our economic record, Mr. Speaker. They were talking about the OECD.
Interrupt again. It's starting to get a little noisy. I'm having a hard time hearing the answer, and I'm sure the honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South, is having a hard time hearing a response to his question. So I'm going to ask the honourable Minister for Families to start from the top, please.
Mr. Speaker, as I was saying, it's typical of the Conservatives to take yes for an answer as the Minister of Finance is scheduled to go tomorrow. But of course, that will depend on the Conservatives to stop their filibuster. But let's talk about our economic record, Mr. Speaker. My honourable colleague was talking about the OECD. Well, when the Conservatives came into office back in 2006, they ranked 17th when it came to child poverty. By the time they left in 2015, Canada ranked 24th, Mr. Speaker. They fell. So I'm not going to take any lessons from the Conservatives, but currently Canada ranks second in OECD when it comes to reducing child poverty. Good work.
The honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Well, that's great news, Mr. Speaker. I look forward to having the finance minister for 2 hours, as you just said. That's terrific. What we don't look forward to is this Liberal budget bonanza that's going to drive Canadians deeper into debt. Per family, $4,200 deeper into debt. And what will they get for that $4,200? Higher energy costs, higher food costs, and a lower standard of living. Will this finance minister finally come to Finance Committee for 2 hours to explain why Canada's economic growth is predicted to be lower than Latvia, Chile?
I'm going to interrupt. Now I'm having a hard time hearing the question. So I just... Order. 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 When I try to calm things down, it doesn't mean you get to throw rocks just because you think you don't live in glass houses anymore. Please, everybody, calm down. The honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South, from the top, please, and we'll hear the full question. Well, we want to hear the full question. Let's see if we can get through that.
Thank you very much, and thank you for quieting that childish temper tantrum. This Liberal budget bonanza is driving Canadians further and further into debt. Each Canadian family is being driven down to the cost of $4,200 a month. And what are Canadians getting for it? Higher energy costs, higher food costs. I'm going to repeat this question one more time. Will the minister appear for 2 hours to explain her failed economic record?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, you shouldn't be too troubled by not hearing the question from the Conservatives, because it is the same nonsensical question we have heard repeatedly and which we have answered repeatedly. So let me assure everyone that I am looking forward to appearing before the Finance Committee tomorrow, as I have enjoyed questions today. And as to what Liberal economic policy is delivering for Canadians, let me say this. Jobs, jobs, jobs. The strongest job market in Canadian history, and that's what matters to hard-working Canadians.